Welcome to ABA Generalized. I'm going to reintroduce us since G isn't here. So we have Anne and Erika, and we have a special guest, Krista, with us here today.
Hi.
So hi, Krista.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Producer G is not here to help keep us in line, so please bear with us on this episode. Clearly we're just a hot mess right now. Anyways, so Krista and I actually went to, I guess, middle school and high school together.
Yep.
We actually grew up across the street from one another for all that time period. So that's how Krista came to be a guest on our show. Not only because she's one of my closest and long-term friends, but fun fact, she's also an awesome special education teacher, just saying. So we wanted to bring her on and talk to her about just some questions that we had. Maybe some of our listeners are interested in understanding a little bit more about the special education background. So Krista, I know I didn't mention everything about you, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a special ed teacher, elementary age. I originally went to school for elementary ed. I went to Rowan, and then I did K to 6 as my cert, and then I went back for my special ed cert and ended up getting my master's in it. So I have my master's in special ed, and this is my 6th year teaching, but my 4th year as a special ed teacher.
What made you switch from gen ed to special ed?
Honestly, it just opened more avenues with jobs initially, and then I ended up loving it. But initially it was, everyone says, oh, when you go to school to get your education degree, everybody that I talk to now, I'm like, you have to get your special ed cert, because one, it makes you more marketable, but two, it's just such a rewarding field. So now that I have it, I would never change that. But initially it kind of opened more avenues for me. And then I kind of never really knew what age group I wanted or what area I wanted. And it really helped me figure out like, oh, this is what I want. So it kind of worked out like that.
That's awesome. So you kind of just answered the next question that we had, which was how long you've been a special education teacher. And, so I guess like when you were in school, were you taught anything in terms of like applied behavior analysis, or was that kind of just never really touched upon? And
for my bachelor's, no, not that I can recall. My master's, I don't know if it was like ABA specifically, but I do remember having a behavior class. But I also remember thinking like, it's one of those things that when you have it in a class, like it was also online. So doing it in person and then learning about it from a textbook is completely different. So, and I've said frequently, like everything that has been the most valuable to me that I have learned has been like on the job. All the things that I've learned has come from working with people who have all this knowledge about these areas that they specialize in. And I know I had a behavior class for my master's, but I remember thinking like, this isn't until I experience this firsthand. I feel like you process it differently once you go through an experience with a student.
Yeah,
If that makes
absolutely.
sense.
I know that makes sense to me. I know that it might look differently in a classroom. Like Anne and I, when we were in our master's programs to become BCBAs, like completely different than what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Like I remember being in a behavior interventions class, I think it was, and it was talking about FBAs, which that's your functional behavior analysis, and trying to figure out what the function of the behavior is as a whole. We do these mocks, but like doesn't give you the same kind of like context or reality to it.
Yeah, and I feel like the book is like, oh, well,
having a class like that.
And you got to go back to school.
Like, unless I was like, I already know this, I'm like backtracking and was like, whatever this is, like, so it, and it was all online too. So
I feel like
I don't remember.
You can read the scenarios and it's like, well, if Johnny flips the desk and then like, hits you, what do you do? But then when you're in the classroom and Johnny flips the desk and hits you, you're like, you're not like on page 32. Like you really don't. It's all like you learn it as you go.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that you had mentioned to me a while back, you have a BCBA that oversees you in school, correct?
Yeah, she's fantastic. So we have one for the whole district, which is
How big
challenging.
is your district? Can I ask that?
Yeah, no, you can. We have one of each, like middle, high school, elementary.
Oh, okay, okay. I
So
was gonna say because I just started with a district and there's 13 schools. 13 or 14. Yeah. So I'm like, there's 4 of us.
Yeah, well, it's still like sometimes you're like, oh, well, she's not here today. And there's always like you can always call like the child study team and everything for help. But when I have like specific questions about like taking data that are like specific for a behavior, like a student with a behavior, I'm like, I need you here all the time. Like it's so hard when you're spread between schools. But she's been fantastic. We started with her, I think, 3 years ago. So yeah, she's been really, and they just like it's like someone you bring in who notices different things than you do. Mm-hmm. Like I have all my observations of a certain student, but then when she comes in, you're like, oh, I never would have thought of that. So then it's like kind of cool to collaborate with other people on that kind of stuff.
I love to hear that you've had such a positive experience with collaborating with her, because I'm sure it can be hard. Like, Erika and I have never been in like the teacher spot where like, this is my classroom, I want things the way I want it. So it's nice to hear that like you have someone coming in and giving suggestions and being open to that.
Yeah. She's been very, very useful for us the past few years.
What, outside of your district BCBA, do you collaborate with other providers outside of school?
I personally haven't. And it's not that I don't have a desire to, I just don't even know, like, to be honest, where I would start. I know sometimes it'll happen where, not me personally, but I know people who've had students who have like an at-home BCBA. So then they're collaborating with the school BCBA in the at-home and trying to get, so you mean specific like ABA providers, right? Not like other like mental health.
I mean, I guess either one, right?
Because
that like
we
even
have
like
had.
Speech, OT,
Oh, well, so speech and OT I collaborate with, but like they're within the building. So yeah, I feel like I'm constantly in the OT office asking for strategies for my students. But and speech is really useful too. It's something that's always a field that I'm like, if I could go back and do it all over again, like I kind of wish that I like took that up because it's so interesting, all the little like mechanics that you don't think about. Yeah. So we definitely collaborate with them. And then the outside piece where if students are receiving outside services, like counseling and that kind of stuff, working with, like I've had students in the past where we work together with them to make sure that like everybody's kind of on the same page, receiving the same information, like one direct line of context so things don't get, like misinterpreted or whatever, which is also helpful because then we know how to, they can give us strategies in school that maybe work at home or maybe don't work that we could try.
Yeah, I guess it, when you're in a school, you don't get as much experience working with outside collaborators.
Yeah, there's not really, and it would be cool to do that. I just think a lot of the services are already in the building, right? Mm-hmm. So you reach out to them, and then I guess if there's an opportunity to reach out to other people, I probably would. But yeah, I never really had the thought to because everything is kind of just like right there.
Yeah.
But I have texted Erika
sounds like
about
you have
things
a good
before.
Team.
Yeah. She'll like text
Erika count?
No, because I'm not giving any advice.
I know. She's like, I refuse to give advice about not my students. I'm like, but I need help.
I'm like, go talk to your BCBA. I'm sorry. And then she'll vent about something and she'll be like, I can't believe this happened. I'll be like, listen, do your ABC data and talk to your BCBA.
And yeah.
So I guess like, how much do you use ABA within the classroom with knowing you're using those strategies or strategies that you've been taught?
I mean, I feel like not as much as we probably should be because I feel like it's not, special ed is so, I don't know what the right word is. It's so different across the board, right? Because like there's, you have your self-contained classes, you have your pull-out classes, and then you have your inclusion classes. So it's going to look different in every single room. So I've had classes where, you don't think to even implement these strategies when you see like behavior starting, and then until it like completely escalates and you're like, oh my God, now what do I do? versus like when you start off knowing that you're like in a class with all these behaviors where you're like right away gonna like start implementing it. So to be honest, I feel like it's not something that's definitely in like our forefront until something happens, and then it's like, okay, now we need to implement it. Like that's something that I feel like definitely if we had like more opportunities to like learn about it and how to like implement it like from day one, it, you know, but there's only one BCBA, which is hard. I wish we like each had our own, like each classroom, in each school, just to sit.
And then with that, like I know you have. Well, I'm just assuming based off of what I'm learning as I've only been in a school district position for almost 3 months.
Is it 3? I thought it was 2.
Oh yeah, I guess almost 2 months. Yeah.
We don't know math. We've already discussed this on a previous episode.
I don't know how we do our jobs. I don't know how we graph. I don't know. Don't ask me. But with that, like, do you have any opportunities to learn like on staff development days, like ABA basic training?
I mean, to be honest, no, I haven't. It's kind of just like when it happens, you seek out and then everyone kind of starts collaborating when these things start to happen. But there hasn't been like a moment where it's like, okay, here we're going to learn about how to do ABA data and how to take it. Like the BCBA told me to take ABC data a couple months ago, and I was like, I know what that is because of Erica, and she was like very impressed with me. But like my whole job revolves around data, right? So as a special ed teacher, it's just something. The second something happens, I'm like writing it down and like trying to figure out patterns. But not everyone does that because their job doesn't revolve around data. And I think like those kinds of staff development would be useful because, you know, I feel like everyone across the board is always like, oh, I didn't learn anything today. Like not even my school, like everybody across the board is just like, what was this? But we have had in the past, like some choice time things, which I know like my sister works at a school and she said they had this recently where it was like, you could choose like AI in the classroom, or then you could choose like self-care. There's different, like if that was one of those workshops, like I chose like we had like a medical emergency one last time where you could like learn about how to handle those situations. So I feel like people would definitely go to it if given the opportunity. It just, I think it's hard. It's a hard sell for a whole group because, you know, you got people who are like, I'm never going to use this. But then when you need it, you're like, oh, shoot. So I feel like if you make it a choice, that's like the best way to introduce it initially. People can like dip their toes in it and then be like, oh, you should go to that next time. And then like spread the word.
Well, and especially with it being such a small school, like it makes sense to being like, well, why would we try and train a whole district of a small, like of a small district? I mean, these strategies, right? Like for everyone to be available to it. But then again, like it's such a useful tool most of the time, even like regular education teachers, like I'll talk to them and they're like, oh, that's a good strategy. I just collaborated with another special education teacher a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned boundaries for a kiddo, and I like literally mentioned just putting blue tape on the floor. That's it. And she was like, that is such a good idea. I never would have thought about that. Like little things like that, like where you're collaborating with the other person in general, right? Like if you don't have that person that you can bounce stuff off of ideas every other day, or even just like in general, just because like you don't have the resources to you consistently, you know, that's unfortunately the downfall of smaller districts. But I guess that kind of like goes into my next question. Like I'm assuming maybe it's just a Pennsylvania thing, but like we had things called verbal behavior classrooms.
Oh, you're in my brain. I was thinking about that.
Have you ever heard of a verbal behavior classroom?
No.
Okay, so it's based upon this lovely book, the VB map.
It's our Bible. Just kidding.
That's not really. It's like a part of our like life. It's our verbal behavior milestones assessment, and I feel like we've mentioned it so many times on this podcast already.
It's a major insurance requirement. That's basically why we use it a lot.
And it's your milestones. Yeah, that too. And like it literally looks at like your little milestones that people wouldn't really think to look at. So like you know, requests, labeling, answering questions, matching, all those things. And it goes from like I think I even had the book open the other day, and I was like,
did.
I think it's 0 to like, it's like literally birth to 4 years old, I think.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So
but you can use it for kids who are older than that, you know, if developmentally they fall in that range.
Or if it's like even just appropriate to utilize in general. So like I know like Anne and I, we worked in a district, we were contracted in Pennsylvania, and there were verbal behavior classrooms. And that's basically what they utilized, is they utilize like all of our strategies, all of our prompting, all of our data collection, all that stuff, but within the special education classroom. So I wasn't sure if there was something like that you've heard of before.
No, but it's really interesting because like we always talk about like, you know, even a lot of times kids come in through the general education classrooms and we notice like that their, you know, their language is lacking, right? They can't express that something's wrong. They can't express what they need. And then you talk to the parents and they're like, well, they didn't talk till they were 3. And you're like, and no one was concerned. Like, I feel like these are things that like I wish more people knew about, because those are the type of, because then the question always becomes like, well, are they functioning academically like higher and their verbal language is just low? Because then it becomes, well, where do we put this student, right? Like if we classify this student, where do you put them? And that sounds like where they should be, is a classroom where they're going to focus on those skills, like developing the language that they need. Yeah, that's cool. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, no, we love them. And I swear we've mentioned it multiple times on this podcast in general, not only just the VB map as a whole, but like the classrooms, because Anne, I don't think sees them out where she is. I don't see them down where I am.
There are no, there's different structures, and I'm not, I'm in some classrooms where it's like full on special ed. You know, it's like heavily with like visuals. So like there's that, but I'm also supporting a lot of gen ed classrooms, and like older kiddos, like,
yeah,
you know, like behavior BCBAs in schools, you don't just see kids with autism. Like if there's an IEP, if the BCBA has like minutes, like that we calculate it as minutes,
which is so different than like outside, like because we go by hours and like
it's minutes. And like if you're, and I don't know if this is how it was, Erica, when we were in PA, because you know I have full access to the IEPs, and yes, we did in PA and in the one school we were in, but I never really like like I put in my progress and then that was it.
Right.
But it's different where like it's mostly consultation with the teachers and not really like you're supporting the students that way and not as direct. So that's different. And that kind of leads me to another question. I'm like thinking of questions as we're going, because I'm like, oh, this is what we have or don't have. Do you have this? So I'm wondering if you in your district or classroom have like one-on-one aids or even RBTs, if you're familiar with what an RBT is.
I only know what it is because of Erica, and we do not so we do not have that. We do have one-on-ones, yes.
Okay. So, but they don't have that extra training that an RBT has?
No.
Okay. So and like, is it for like the whole classroom, or are they with specific students all day?
So there's a variety, right? We have like whole class aids, then we have like 2-on-1 aids, then we have 1-on-1 aids. The requirements to get on one-on-one, like it's like a process. I had to fill out a form a few years ago for a student to get on one-on-one, and it's like a whole thing to justify. And I'm like, why can't you just come observe and maybe like, yeah, you know, they need the one-on-one. Why is this so hard? Because then you always hear like, well, there's no money, and you're like, okay, but now we're just doing a disservice because they don't. So it's hit or miss. Like I had an aide, last year who was fantastic with my one student. But it really depends on how extensively they're collecting the data, and how like there was times where like my aide was out and the sub was going to try to do the data, and I was like, no, I'm just going to do it. Like I will teach and collect because it's so it's invaluable to have it. that I can't just like waste the day like on be like, oh well, there's a sub, it's fine. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
yeah,
I mean, I get that.
I think, yeah. And for any sub, it's like, it's helpful to have a sub, but at the same time, it's like, do you have the time to train that sub on this student and their behaviors and their goals? And it's like, just be here as a body, pretty much, and I will handle the rest.
Just make sure everything stays safe.
Sometimes it's like, just like leave that student alone. You help the other ones with the academics, and I will do this.
Yeah. You'll be the one-on-one.
Yeah, basically. But it's almost like easier, like you said, rather than being like, okay, this is what you need to know. We have, 3 hours. Let me catch you up to speed real quick.
Mm-hmm.
But for real, because I feel like you would have to like start them immediately, that like before the school day even starts, to start explaining how to take the data, scenarios that happen when you might have to take that data. And
when do you build a rapport with that student?
Right, that too.
Yeah.
There's so many factors into it. But I guess that's another question that I have is like, how many kids do you have in a classroom that like need the one-on-one aid, So I guess like first question, part one, how many kids do you have in a classroom? Part two is how many of them actually need that one-on-one and have it?
So wait, Gen Ed, how many kids do we have in a classroom?
Oh gosh, are you in both?
Yeah.
So you don't have your own, like, do you have your own classroom too? No, you push it.
No. Yeah, that was, I pulled out a different year.
Oh, okay. Well, that changes everything. Oh gosh. Okay, so you go like from classroom to classroom kind of thing?
No, I'm with one class all day, which I'm very grateful for. Because sometimes the schedule is like, but
yeah. So then you're with that one class all day. How many kids are in that class that you
20.
support? I got. And then how many you support?
Okay, so there's 23. I support 6.
Okay.
But the one that I always talk to you about is not one of mine. It's not classified
as part of
doesn't have like that is a student without an IEP, but like all these things are happening.
Services but needs them.
Correct. So as a result, we're taking data, out the wazoo to
justify
that.
And then, so like that student would be one who, in my opinion, would require a 1-to-1. But I don't have any other students who need one. Typically, you only get a 1-to-1 for behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's really hard to get with like academics. But then last year, I pulled out, and I had 5, and I had 1 with a 1-to-1. That was the first year I ever had a 1-to-1 with a student. But then you have.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, then you have classes like the behavior classroom, where there's several students with 1-to-1. So you could have like 3 aides in there at a time, depending on the makeup of the classroom, basically. But the classroom sizes, like this year, like ours is 23. We started at 24, and then we ended up with 23 eventually. Like some of the older classes have like 25, 27. Like they're huge this year.
I don't know if this is something that is offered. Do you have any classrooms that focus more on like daily living skills rather than academic skills? So like more like brushing teeth, like cooking,
toilet training.
Yeah. So our autism classroom does some of that, but it's not like a specific daily living skills, but I do know that she does some of that stuff. But I also have a friend who over the summer taught ESY at the high school, and they did a lot of like cooking and practicing like daily living stuff. So I think in the older grades, they might practice it more than in the younger grades.
That's great. I haven't like worked in a classroom really like that, but I think that would be cool to see. And like, because let's face it, like not everyone's going to be able to graduate, with a diploma,
for academics.
Right.
For academics. Yeah. So it's like, how do we support them so that they're still successful after school?
We do a lot of, I know in our building, at least, they'll do a lot of like field trips to places, to like restaurants or like shops. So they like, not even like like the autism class, but other self-contained classes where they do go, but it's like all of the self-contained classes where they're practicing just like going out and doing stuff. And then my uncle, who's a teacher, he teaches high school. He's a special ed teacher. He used to do that like with the high school. He would take them out, like the students in his classes, and he'd take them like shopping and to the food store and restaurants to like practice those kind of skills, which is pretty cool.
Love that, like how inclusive you are with your students. You know, how I'm sure most of your goals too and your IEP have something to do with the fact that like they are included in you know, not just like the classroom as a whole, but with their peers that are typical developing, which is also super, super important, right? So I love that, that you push in and you're not like a whole separate classroom. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because you can see like, and I've seen this where it's like, it's written in their IEP that they go to their gen ed classroom X amount of times a day, and sometimes that's not being implemented, which is like really a disservice to the students. Like they can, like, if you know, if you're in a self-contained classroom, great, if that's something you need, but there's also benefits to being around, you know, typically developing peers.
Yeah, I believe the self-contained classes join for the morning portion like of the day, like just like a little bit where they all like greet each other and do like morning activities. And then for specials, but I think lunch and reset, their schedules are kind of like changed up this year where they like go with one grade versus like 3 grades can be in a self-contained classroom. So instead of like, okay, you go with second, you go with first, you go with kindergarten, because then the teacher schedule is like a mess. Like all of them will just go with 1 grade level. But for specials and morning, but that's like the only times that they're together, really.
I mean, it's still something. And if it like, I don't know if it's a goal to have them, you know, to increase that time.
Yeah, I have no idea. I've never had, like in pull-out, I've seen like, you know, we'll pull out for 90 minutes for ELA, pull out for math, you know, and then like gen ed with an aid for social studies or science. But I've never seen like that, the self-contained IEPs where like the goals for minutes, like what those would look like. But it's definitely be interesting to see like what they're working towards, you know, like if they're trying to increase minutes amongst like age level period.
Yeah. Like what's the end goal here?
Yeah,
absolutely. So question about ABA.
Okay.
Being that you have minimal, I guess, exposure to it within the school as a whole, do you hear any stigmas about ABA? Like, I mean, you talk to parents probably all the time that you work with. So I don't know if anyone's receiving like services outside of school that like, or have even debated it because of the stigmas that revolve around it.
Not personally so much. I know some people are kind of like, I feel like the biggest thing I commonly hear is like, why are you doing this? Like, why am I taking all of this data? What are we doing with this? And I feel like that's the biggest thing is some people get frustrated with the amount of work that it is. And then like, be like, well, now what? Like we did all this work. And I feel like that's commonly what I hear is more of a frustration versus a stigma, because like, you know, like we were talking about that whole training, nobody really knows what to do or where do we go from here, which I feel like this would be helpful. But I feel like I haven't really seen like I've seen pushback with plenty of things, but that personally, I haven't firsthand seen it.
Yeah. I know that's like one thing that I feel like, I mean, obviously we already touched upon this. I feel like ABA in schools need to be increased personally, right? Like, I think like if we can teach every teacher, not just special education teachers, but like all teachers, different strategies, different little things that would be helpful throughout the day. Maybe if you have a kid that like needs a little bit of support, but like doesn't qualify for the IEP purpose, you know, or like any of that ABA special education pull out or any of that type of stuff, like having those little bits of knowledge can really help any kid go a long way.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think it gets put into this box of like ABA is only used for this population, so I don't need to know about it. But it's like that's it. Yes, there's data supporting that ABA, you know, there's all data with the autism population, and that's why it's used in the autism population. But it can also work outside of that population.
Right.
And I think that could be scary or off-putting to some people. It's like, well, they don't have autism, so why do I need to know it?
Yeah, I feel like I find that with like when it's like, oh, we're recommending your child be evaluated. They're like, well, they don't have a disability. I'm like, okay, before we jump the gun, like I'm not saying your child has a severe learning. I'm just saying we need to know more. There's clearly a gap, but let's figure it out versus being like, well, there's nothing wrong with my child. Like I'm not saying something's wrong with your child. I'm just saying we can help them more if we go this route.
Yeah.
Well, and then maybe there's still just like a stigma against having a learning disability in general,
Oh, yeah.
For reinforcement purposes of your classroom, what is it that you typically utilize?
Reinforcement of what?
So, great question. So I probably should dive in a little bit more to that question.
Like academics.
So
yeah, like being on task,
proper behaviors that you're looking for,
work completion,
any of those things.
So staying in the classroom.
Not eloping. I've had that.
You've had one. You've had an eloper.
Yeah, I have had an eloper. So that was one of that student's goals. Like that student had a behavior chart and they could earn points based on like each period of the day, right? So say like reading, whatever time reading was, I forget. And they like can earn points. And like we would say like, remember like you're earning. And then if they would like, engage in a behavior that they weren't, but we'd like prompt them once, be like, remember, we're not earning if we're engaging in that behavior. And then anytime they got like a tally, it was like, there was like, 1, 2, 3. So it was like 1 was the least points you could get in, or I think 0. I was like 0, 1, 2 maybe. And then it would be like, okay, well now we're at a level 2. And if we continue to engage, and then, they were writing down like the times and this was the aid would write down like the times and the behaviors that were occurring. But then like if they did a really good job, or they could verbalize like, hey, I need a break. We, would say like, okay, like first, then basically, like if you can do like 1 sentence, then you can go for a walk, and then they can choose. So like almost we had like a jar of choices that student could choose from. So they felt like they were kind of like in control. But also like if they were just running out of the room, well, then automatically the points go away. So then, and then at the end of the day, they would cash out the points. And like there was like different levels of points that they could earn. I don't believe that system is used anymore. That was it was a couple years ago, I think they used it, and they modify it every year based on what works. But I do believe that student still uses it because it worked for them. But yeah, kind of just the ability to choose, like even a choice ring for if they're feeling overwhelmed or if they're feeling stressed, like you can choose like go for a walk, I can color, I can go get a drink of water, I can go see another teacher, to try to help. The problem is I feel like sometimes it's not like grasping them, right? They're like, I don't care, I'm not doing that. But I was talking to the BCBA yesterday and she was saying like when the one behavior starts, like, and it's starting to escalate, like when it started at a low level behavior, like try to just be like, we're not doing that, we're not talking about it, and see if like we can like kind of squash it before it starts. But then if you see it start to escalate, then engage in the lower level behavior by saying like, okay, do you want to go for a walk? Do you want, because like versus like, okay, now we're here, let's try to take it back down a little bit and like get at the root of it, versus now we're like clear the classroom. Yeah. Which I found interesting too.
Have you had to like clear the classroom a lot, or I mean just in general, I guess like
I was gonna say define a lot.
More than twice.
Yeah, not like specifically this year, but just like in the past few years. Yes.
Got you.
Yeah,
I know that was something that like if a client is engaging in high risk behaviors, like it's the most appropriate to remove the safe kids and work through the behavior you have to.
Well, because what I've been told a lot too is like you try to get them to leave, right? If they're like, well, I want to leave anyway, and they'll leave with someone, then okay. But if they're refusing and then it's escalating, then okay, then it's no longer safe for everyone else. Then everyone else just has to leave.
Well, and then they have an audience, right? Like, so that's also why sometimes you have to remove the other kids, because, you know, you're getting a show at the end of the day, and then that reinforces that behavior, and then you see it more frequently and all that fun stuff. So yeah, that makes sense to why, like, you know, sometimes you do have to remove the kid or remove the other students. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's, you know, you can destroy a classroom and you can, for the most part, put it back together, but you know, if it becomes a danger to other students, it's just better to remove them. You know, even if it disrupts, it's going to disrupt the day, of course, but at the end of the day, what's more important? Safety.
Right. Then it becomes funny because then you're trying to like do a song and dance to distract the other kids, be like, everything's fine. Like,
yeah, and they're like, look, they're doing this now. It's like, okay.
We're taking a walk. It's not related. Which is always fun.
None of this connects to one another, people.
Right. Yeah.
Who wants to go for early recess?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Well, Anna, do you have any other questions that you wanted to ask in particular to ABI before I ask my follow-up, my last question?
No, I mean, Krista, do you have any general questions for us?
I don't think so.
Or just about ABA in general?
Well, what do you, so I guess for you specifically, like, what do you see in schools? Like, do you see it used a lot in your school, or similar kind of to what I said?
Oh, yeah. And I'm not the first. So there were 2 BCBAs in this district, and they hired 2 more because the BCBAs were like, we really need more help. Please hire more. Yeah. So they did a really good job of setting up ABA in the classrooms that I have taken over. I see, you know, teachers using like behavior books and having like a store that the kids can go to and like buy like little toys at the end of the day. I think it's harder in gen ed just because they're like, they have higher expectations, especially with the older kids. It's like, get it together. Like, it's time to listen, do your work type of thing.
Right.
Not to say like they're all great teachers, but it's like, you know, you have expectations, and I think this is kind of like newer, like, you know, we're not going to punish for everything. We're not going to send them to detentions for everything. I think it also depends on the district too. Like if they have more stricter policies, you know, we don't want to see students getting away with these behaviors. And I think that's the general mentality, but then it's like, well, let's figure out the function of those behaviors and try to address it before we get there, before we see those behaviors happen. So that's like a lot of what I'm seeing is like, you know, could this suspension have been prevented? And like
literally
doing FBAs are very lengthy, I'm learning. Because Erica, when we did FBAs in PA, they were like not long. Like it was literally just the ABC
data and determine the function of the behavior there, and let's write it out what your hypothesis is, what you want to do as replacement behaviors. I mean, that's even what I do. Like I feel like it might be,
and but we didn't have to, it was discouraged to talk to parents, and at least that was my understanding of the school we were in. It was like, you don't talk to the parents.
I'm thinking you meant like, I was like, wait, it wasn't discouraged to talk to parents like in the
like in a school setting, houses. But here it's like, no, you need to call the parent, you need to get the reinforcer inventory, you need to do these questionnaires. And I'm like, oh, like I didn't do this in a school setting before. I think also, am I allowed to call them?
You and I had very unique situations within our school district that we had been contracted to, because we were contracted. So it was very, very different. They just kind of wanted us to prove the need for it. And like, you know, you can come
and oversee the RBTs.
And oversee the RBTs, which is also why we had asked if you had any in your classroom, Krista, because like we were providing those RBTs because we were outside contractors. but also like they didn't really expect much from us, but like, I mean, Anne and I did over the top stuff half the time because that's who we are.
Yeah.
And
we were like, what? You don't see your BCBA for a whole month? That's weird.
We're like, no, we're gonna come out weekly. We're gonna do this, and we're gonna do that. Like,
yeah, and we do have RBTs, we have aides, we have one-on-ones. There are some changes happening in the district. And another BCBA who we're going to have on, she just went to a conference here. And there was a talk about BCBAs in schools. So she was sharing that information with us. And she said like there's a lot she wants to share, and like just to get, because it's like you're constantly putting out fires, and it's like we shouldn't be needed for these little problems so it's like we need to better support the teachers so that they feel confident enough to handle these like smaller situations before they escalate. So like that's one of our goals is like, okay, how do we prevent this little teeny tiny thing that's constantly disrupting your classroom maybe, and they don't necessarily need an IEP or a behavior plan or, higher interventions like that. So yeah. I'm excited to figure that out.
Yeah.
That sounds fun. Different, definitely so different. So enough about school and ABA. Krista, what do you do in your free time? Go.
I like to read.
What do you read?
What do I read? Lots of different things.
She reads labels off of cans. She reads. She reads my text messages. She also ignores half of my text messages.
I gotta tell you, I don't know why. Like for some reason, most people I answer right away. Erika, I see the text and I go, okay, I'll answer it later. And then I go to text her again later and I'm like, oh my God, I never answered her. All the time, just Erika. And I don't know why. I'm so sorry.
You need to take some data on that.
I know, yeah.
Escape maintained.
Listen, I asked her a simple question. What do you want to do when you come visit? And she didn't respond to me until this morning because she knew she was coming on here. That's why.
My phone was charging across the room and I went to go look at it. I saw I had a text from you and then I forgot to answer it. So that's what that was. Yeah, so I like historical fiction. I also am big into the ACOTAR series right now, like everybody else. The Court of Thorns and Roses series. I don't know if you've heard of it. Erika, do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about because my supervisor is like absolutely in love with that series. She's reading through it, I think, right now.
Gotta read it. Highly recommend. And then crocheting, blankets kind of stuff. I like to run. Haven't done it in a few weeks, but I do like to do it.
Are you still doing run club with your little guys?
Oh, no. Because I tutor more now. So I tutor 3 days a week. And I did running club last year. We did it once a week and then we did it twice a week for 5 weeks in the spring. And it was fun, but it was like a lot of work for the payout for tutoring is way more and it's not taxed versus running club was fun and it was rewarding, but I just there's like not enough hours in the day, basically.
Also, you had kids that definitely didn't want to be there, would just sit there.
No. There was kids that they were like, I don't want to do this. And I said, well, your parents signed you up, so I'm really sorry. But we were doing like games. We weren't like running a lot. Like we would run laps and then play they always wanted to play red light, green light. So we would like run across the baseball field. But I was like, we're not like running miles here, guys. Like we can work with this a little bit. But yeah, that was fun for a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I think that G would be yelling at us right now to wrap it up. So I'm gonna wrap it up. And because Anne is fired as of G fired her last episode. So anywho's, thank you so much, Krista, for being one of our guests. We are
Thanks for having me.
Grateful that you were willing to come on here, talk about your experiences as a special education teacher and working with ABA as minimally as you are. But if you want to be a guest on ABA Generalized or have any questions or concerns or any of those things, or just want to tell us what you think about us, please be nice. You can email us.
5 stars.
You can email us at aba.generalized.podcast@gmail.com. We're on Instagram, ABA Generalized the pod, YouTube, ABA Generalized, TikTok. There, we're working on it. It's all there. Just follow us, please. We have 0 followers. I'm following 15 people and no one's following us back. We're on there as ABA Generalized. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Well, thank you guys. And woo, that's another episode. We did it. Krista's in with the wave. All righty. Woo. ABA Generalized, the podcast, is not providing professional advice. Please seek a professional in your area for specific advice and support.